All right, we're going to head over to the cloud in the sky, the studio in the sky, excuse me. We've got the CEO of Meridian Energy on the line with us with the Davis Refinery. It's the refinery that is setting new standards across the energy industry now for over a decade. And William Prentice, how you doing today?
Great. Thank you, Jason. Good to see you.
Well, let's get an update on the Davis Refinery. First of all, set the table on how it differs from other refineries. We should mention what you're trying to do has not been done in the last 50 plus years of building a refinery from ground up. They call it greenfield refinery from ground up. A lot of the refineries over the last 75 years have just been remodel projects, if you will, hodgepodge type of thing. So what you're doing is truly groundbreaking, pioneer, and innovative. With that, I'll hand the baton off to you to kind of just describe the refinery and an update where you're at.
Great, Jason. Thank you. Yeah, the Davis Refinery, I have to admit that we are cheating a bit. When you start with a blank sheet of paper and you start in the Bakken with arguably the best crude oil in the world to process, it's pretty easy to design a process around that will be clean and very, very efficient. That's what we set out to do. The company that we put together, Davis Refinery, was the excuse to pull together some professionals that were not real happy with some of the work that they've done over the past years. And this was a chance to do it a little bit better. We ended up with a product that's a lot better. There hasn't been, as you pointed out, a refinery built in the United States for 50 years. When Davis is done, it's going to be one of the first refineries to take advantage of all of these technological advances from the last 50 years. And it's amazing to note that some of that includes all the digital innovations. It's going to be the first fully digital refinery, and that'll aid in production simulation and monitoring and safety, emissions control, and training operators for Davis and the other refineries that'll follow on after Davis is completed. For the past several years, we went through many challenges, and you were kind enough to help me document some of those in our previous conversations. We took a lot longer to get permitted than we thought because we ended up with opposition that we didn't expect. We were very naive about that. We thought environmental activists would flock to our support, given the fact that we were going to be so much cleaner and help clean up the industry. Then after we got the permits, we ended up getting sued for several years. That brought us to COVID and difficulties associated with that year or two in the energy industry. And then the Biden administration was not particularly favorable to what we were trying to accomplish. But it's been very interesting over the past year since the election. Things have been much improved in the industry. There's a growing realization that the energy future of the United States has to include fossil fuels, but that you just have to do them better. You have to do it cleaner. You have to do it smarter and safer. And since we're in the forefront of what the new refining industry is going to look like, that positions us very well. So it's taken a while to get here, but we're very happy with where we're at.
And I'd like to get into some of those issues here in a moment or two. And I'm kind of writing it down as polarizing politics because there's so much of what you were facing was politics. It was the movement that started to just get rid of fossil fuels, like just completely. And that's a very hard conversation to have with people because their mind is already made up. And so trying to explain to somebody that the car they drove in And the store that they go and buy their food from wouldn't exist without, fossil fuels and petroleum products and et cetera, et cetera. They don't want to hear it and they can walk away. And that's a really hard position to be in if you're in your position, because the only thing you have is quality of life increases and the truth. And all they have is pie in the sky and platitudes and a group of enablers, which is probably the most important thing that they have that allows them to carry this. I don't know if it's a false narrative or a false hope, but it's very misleading, and it's really driven by emotion rather than fact. I do want to talk about the technology part and the environmental part, but how, without getting into the politics, because I don't want to put a target on your front or back, how much of what you've been experiencing is emotion over facts, though?
Well, that's
I
the
should say
difficult
the
part of it.
roadblocks and obstacles. How much is emotion over facts? So sorry about that. Yeah.
No, that's fine. Our opposition uh, was from two groups, and they were both equally important to us because we thought that they would both be on our side. Generally speaking, the anti-fossil crowd was adamantly opposed to us. They felt they had to be, but the fact remains that the physics will not allow you to have a world that they envision. Even the sources of energy that they argue should be replacing all fossil fuels, such as wind and solar, cannot exist without fossil fuels. The equipment that they depend upon requires the kinds of temperatures and thermal processes that have their roots in the fossil fuel industry. And we're quite a ways away from any kind of technological breakthroughs that would change that. Uh, so that was very frustrating to us. We thought that there would be a recognition that you do have to have fossil fuels as part of the mix. You just have to be smarter about it. And, we talked about that I think we're there now. The other group of opponents we had were adamantly opposed to the proximity of the refinery to the Teddy Roosevelt National Park. And we knew that we would have that fight going into this project because, of course, we can read a map and saw that we were 3.5 miles away from TR National Park. But we decided at the end of the day that that was the fight that we should be willing to go ahead and engage in because of the fact that the refinery was going to be so clean. And it was a perfect opportunity to prove how different the technology could enable you to do something differently and cleaner now. The visual impacts, we spent months and months and lots of money proving, for instance, that it sounds funny to say it, but in fact, the earth is curved and you cannot see the refinery from the national park. And had to go through a great deal of effort to do that, including an experiment where we raised balloons and kites over the refinery site and invited anybody to show us a picture of those items. Uh, so we ended up with the county giving us a permit for the site, and we were glad we did go ahead and engage in that battle. Plus, once that refinery is there and people have a chance to see, it's not like something you'll see on the Gulf Coast, spread over hundreds and hundreds of acres. It's going to be a very small, compact, and extremely clean facility. It's more like your local hamburger stand than it is your grandfather's refinery. But those two groups did come out in force. And whenever there's any publicity about the refinery in the local press, they both wake up and come back after us for a little while. But that's just going to stay as part of our reality until we get the plant up and operating, I'm sure.
Now, talking about the environmental and the technology side of things, you discussed the geography, which there's so many layers of politics involved there that quite honestly, most of it from being boots on the ground in North Dakota for the past, well, my life. I mean, I've pretty much lived in Minnesota, North Dakota my entire life with 1 year in California.
Hmm.
And Huntington Beach, actually, lived on Brookhurst. Right across the street was Newport. So we spent most of our time in Newport Beach, and I worked in Irvine at a place called Trophies. It was across the street from a strip club that was open during the day and closed at 5 o'clock. It was the weirdest thing I've ever seen in my life. But anyways,
Well,
um,
yeah, I used to live in Irvine, but I have to deny that I know where that is.
it's
Yes.
called Mermaids back in the days, back in the 90s. I'm pretty sure it's not called that today, but that Irvine was a wake up call to me because literally the town would close down at like 5 o'clock because it was
Hmm.
mostly what would they call that? Light commercial or heavy. It's not industrial by any means. I think Texas Instruments was one of the big anchors of skyscrapers back in the day. But anyway, so most of my life up in North Dakota and Minnesota, I understand how the local Hatfield and McCoy politics work, where you can sometimes even get interfight. In fact, right now there's a frack within the internal party. Wyoming and North Dakota is primarily Republican controlled. Like we're talking 95% to 99% controlled by one party. But the carbon capture is really fracturing a lot of the party right now because it's 100% a government market. You have to get your money from the government, you have to abide by the rules, and that's completely anti-Republican for since the party became around, I guess. So that's fracturing the Republican Party in North Dakota. And what I saw with the Davis Refinery just came down to optics. That's all. That's and so to accentuate your kite and balloon story even more, I remember covering that. I remember the press that went into it and the invitation to everybody to come out with your own binoculars or use the ones that we supply. Look at this, we got a telescope. How deep in the magnifying do you want to go to prove to you between the Earth's curvature, sorry, flat earthers, but the Earth's curvature and also the distance, you can't even see these weather balloons and kites that we have up in the air, and that's from the park. And I think that had a lot to do with you getting the permit from the county because so much of the fear was, oh, the governor and his pet project with the Theodore Roosevelt Library is not going to like this at all. And oh, with the refinery in Dickinson, we had to bail that out after we rolled the red carpet out for Calumet. I mean, so it's not like you don't have examples to show people and say, well, the rule makers kind of did this and then they denied it for us. And really when you pull that onion apart, it has to do with obviously politics, but it has to do with optics within the political party. That's my perception. Before we get into the technological and the environmental aspects that you have done with this refinery, were you guys aware of any of these kind of inner fighting within the state or the junior high optics, I like to call it? It's like a junior high kids from time to time, just trying to, bully others and that kind of thing. I was telling some people down in Texas that when George Bush said you're either with us or you're against us, it's almost like the energy industry took that under their wing too for a while, and some people are still running on that gas, if you will, and that's part of the issue too in North Dakota is that. But were you guys
Right.
aware of that? Did you face any of that? I don't want to get you in trouble, but at the same time, I do want to really extrapolate and explain just some of the obstacles that you really did face and you overcame.
No, well, every time I talk to you, I say something that gets me into trouble, but that's going to happen no matter what. But when we started this, let's admit it, Jason, we were really stupid. We thought, okay, let's let's do this right. Let's start with the engineering. Let's do this in North Dakota. Uh, you know, everything that we can accomplish, not only within the energy industry, but for the local community, is slightly more important there in North Dakota. For instance, the local community of Billings County, at the time we first started working on this, the population of Billings County was 800.
Hmm.
Uh, we're talking about employment that will provide huge opportunities for that local population and nearby Stark County as well. We're going to triple the tax base of Billings County. Uh, People that we talked to were during the whole argument about the park proximity were angry that the park was becoming an issue because the local community felt abandoned by the park. It's the biggest economic entity within Billings County, but does very little to contribute to the local community. The county does not receive significant income from the park at all. And then during the litigation over our air quality permit, um, this is probably where I'll get in trouble, but we were asked to support the relative pollution from the refinery compared to other sources of pollution. And it turned out that the pollution from the refinery will be less than that from the cars of the people visiting the park.
No, you're talking
And
about your refinery?
yes,
Okay,
and
and you were comparing it to other refineries and they
no,
wanted you
other
to.
other sources of pollution in
I
the area.
see. Okay. Okay.
And even the local university in Dickinson, the traffic there is creating air pollution that will be greater than the refinery. This is a very clean facility, and once that came out during litigation, it was funny how the opposition from the park people sort of trailed off a little bit. But the contributions, the positive impacts of the refinery are far greater than the than the negative impacts. And I think we demonstrated that in our permit applications and supporting documents and in litigation over and over and over again. But it still emerges, and it's very frustrating to us after the efforts that we've gone into. And one of the things I never have an opportunity to point out, and I thank you for letting me go on like this, but when we applied for our air quality permit, I think it was in October of 2016. We then did some further engineering and found out that by changing the process somewhat and licensing a relatively new technology, we could actually reduce emissions further than what we had originally applied for. So we amended our application in April of 2017 to reduce the emissions that we were asking to be able to emit. And since then, what we've done in the engineering since even COVID, it turns out that one of the pieces of equipment we're going to have will, in processing diesel, create a little bit of extra hydrogen. And by processing vegetable oil along with the Bakken crude oil and create a market for local vegetable oil, we can use up that hydrogen and reduce pollution further and create renewable diesel out of our refinery. So as a result of that change in our process, which we just made that change about a year ago, this refinery is a net zero carbon refinery. If we had not decided to pursue this project and go through that engineering process, um, that would never have happened. And this is going to be the first in the world.
Now, we should mention this is a diesel refinery, correct?
Well, the diesel side of the refinery is what I was referring to there. Bakken crude oil is such a good crude to process that 92 to 94% of the products are either diesel or gasoline.
Mm-hmm.
There is no so-called residual product from this refinery. We also produce some butane and propane, and everything else is a IMO compliant fuel oil, a very low sulfur fuel oil that'll go to the Great Lakes to power the Laker traffic there. But even that's cleaner than anything else that anybody's ever seen in this business. So we're very proud of what we've accomplished there, and by doing it, we paved the way to do this in other locations as well. So
Yeah, and I want to talk about those other locations in just a second here because William Prentice is the guest, Meridian Energy. We're talking about, I'm not sure if it's called a micro refinery or a small scale refinery, but there should be some sort of qualifying word to point out that it's not it's a hamburger stand refinery, like you said. It's a smaller than it's not a big cracker plant down on the Gulf Coast or anything like that.
no,
And yeah,
it's
go ahead.
about yeah a large refinery such as you would find owned by Chevron, Shell, or Exxon would be 5 to 10 times as big. It's not exactly a mom and pop operation in most respects. When we are in operation, we'll have a annual revenue of just under $2 billion a year, just out of the one plant. So, yeah, it's relatively small, but it's a significant undertaking
But this is
nonetheless.
the direction. This is the direction that the world is going. Is that the world is finding out that it is expensive to transport molecules and energy. So the microgrids, whether it be nuclear or natural gas, or in your case, diesel and some petroleum, you're looking at the way that the systems are going, and the technology and the environmental science has really paved the way. And one of the interviews that I still cite to people is from an interview with one of your early supply contractors. I'm not sure where Zia Engineering is within the fold today, but back when, a decade ago, when I was interviewing some of the supply contractors to really be transparent about what's going into this refinery so that the public could be educated. Of course, we found out it didn't matter the amount of education. You can't change a brick wall's mind from time to time. But I think we're there now to where people's minds are open now to understanding. Okay, now I'm starting to understand we can't throw the baby out with the bathwater. I went through this in the print industry. When the internet came, everybody said that print was going away. And I knew it was going to be impacted, but I knew it wasn't going to go away because the Dead Sea Scrolls have proven that print is never going to go away. Print's gone down to like 20%, but all of the writers and content creators actually came from the Associated Press newspaper industry. So they had to then go find, yeah, that's what I'm saying. And so same thing with this, where the refineries are changing. And so what's happening is that the information and the expertise is changing with it. And I'm telling you, I went through it with the print industry. It's the same reason why the podcast has been able to sustain itself for 15 years, because of what I went through in the print industry, which is known as a paradigm shift.
Yep.
So the paradigm shift in the print industry bankrupted about 95% of the newspapers out there. And the other 5%, they got bought up. So that's what's called a paradigm industry, a shift. The energy industry just went through it for the past decade. Now, if you think I'm joking, go take a look at the mergers and acquisitions. Go take a look at Oxy doesn't even call themselves Occidental Petroleum anymore. And then for a while there, they were just Oxy, a manager or an energy company. Now they're not even any of that. They're a carbon management company. That's what's called a paradigm shift, folks. When your original identity is no longer a part of your business plan anymore. It's a very small part of your business plan. And so anyway, I'm just kind of really setting a very big table, I guess, for this environmental science, which I believe has really helped the oil and gas industry, which was a lot more expensive than I think they ever thought it would be on the educational side of things. But when I was talking with, is it Ed Garcia with Zia Engineering, he explained to
Yes.
me, what's that? Is that his name?
Yeah.
Yeah, Edward Garcia.
Yep.
There we go. In my mind, I always say Fast Eddie, so that's where Eddie came from. Um, he explained how just the bends in the pipes, he got into some other science too, but the stuff that stood out to me was, okay, yeah, that makes sense. As a crow flies straight, that's going to be your best use of energy. And so if you can change the bends and pipes and flow the energy, oh, that took care of 60% of your emissions. Oh my goodness. So to
Yeah.
me, that's what I thought you guys did right. So when you talked about you started from a blank piece of paper, that's what people need to understand is that you're taking care of the environmental science and the technology and the innovation on the front end. That's why the greenfield refineries are so rare, because when things are done think of building a house. Do you want to add your laundry room later or up front? Because if you add it later, you got to figure out the pipes, you got to figure out the flow of new wattage, because a washer and dryer, they got their own plugs, man. You can't just plug it into a 120, 220 outlet and call it good. No, they got to have some kind of weird emoji looking plug-in that's going to go with it. So from the environmental science side of things, discuss a little bit of that, extrapolate on that, dumbed down version of how the bends and pipes can reduce percentages of emissions.
Well, let's look at the history of the industry. At $10 a barrel, uh, a hydrocarbon molecule escaping from a long and poorly fitted together pipe run might not seem like much. At $100 a barrel, uh, it's more significant, and you got to think about it. Uh, why would you why would you spread out a plant and create 10 times the fugitive loss of emissions like that when you could build a nice, tight, smaller plant and control all of that? And that becomes product at the end of the pipe. Uh, that's what we decided to do. And several times during the design of the facility, we changed the plot plan to take advantage of the fact that we could constrict things a little bit more. There's a tendency in the refining industry, because of the fact you have to get in there and maintain a plant and do it safely with heavy equipment, to want to spread out a lot more than we did. So we had to plan around that for future maintenance events and so forth. But yeah, you can get rid of a lot of profitable hydrocarbons by doing a very poor job laying out a facility. And to the extent that you increase the size of the plant in terms of total throughput, for instance, going from 49,500 barrels a day to 165,000 barrels a day, those fugitive emissions that come from just having a much bigger tank farm, much longer pipe runs, bigger units, more duplicated machinery, more heaters, all of that adds up on a per barrel basis. So I think that what we've seen for a project like Davis, for a company like ours, starting as a development stage firm, uh, a plant about the size of Davis, in the case of the one in Texas and the one in Oklahoma, they're going to be somewhat larger, but not much. That's an optimum size from the point of view of a lot of considerations, including operating cost, emissions, and also the time to market. We've had our challenges, and it's taken time to overcome them. But if we'd had to go through a much, much longer permitting process at the federal level, it would have been even longer. And another 3 to 5 years of permitting on top of everything else is not conducive to profits. So having smaller refineries that can go ahead and get all of their permits at the state level rather than the federal level, it's shorter time to market, less cost, and we don't have to worry about who's president at that point in time.
Now, looking at these smaller refineries to go through the state permitting process, North Dakota openly advertised they're open for business, inviting people like yourself and others to come into the Bakken and take advantage of it. And we're finding out now that that was a little bit oversold on a variety of reasons. Texas is the other location where you've identified for a Permian Basin refinery as well. Of course, Texas is another state that I don't know if they openly advertised in the aggressive way that North Dakota did, but they try to differentiate themselves from more of a liberal state and try to really become more of a open for business state, if you will, too, with a little bit more of landowner rights and et cetera, et cetera. You've really come into some opposition, even at the state level, in both the states. What's your biggest challenges at the state level?
Well, it's the same generic challenge, but it's in a forum that is not stacked against you. I risk getting in trouble for talking politics, but going to the EPA for federal permits for a refinery during the Biden administration would have been a really stupid thing to do. It would be the same as going into California and attempting to do a large fossil fuel project. It would be foolhardy unless you went in with some sort of a deal with the state trying to deal with their current situation, for instance, with so many refineries shutting down. But that doesn't mean you're going to get away with murder. We found that out in North Dakota, that North Dakota was generally favorable towards energy projects, is a state that is devoted to nurturing its energy and agricultural sectors. But we had to run through the gauntlet, and they put us through a very, very rigorous process to obtain our permits. We found out later on that the Department of Environmental Quality in North Dakota reached out to a number of other resources to pull in expertise to make sure that they had somebody that could opine on everything that we were proposing. And we had to prove that every single element of the processes that we had proposed for the Davis Refinery were commercially proven in some other existing facility. They were determined that we not be allowed to turn North Dakota into an R&D situation. The same is true in Texas. Texas is obviously devoted to its hydrocarbon businesses and is favorable towards permitting energy facilities. And arguably, because of the size of the industry down here in Texas, it's a little bit easier to get things through a permit process than maybe North Dakota would be. But still, they ask the same questions. You have to provide the same level of proof. And you're not going to get away with anything in either state. We're finding out that the same is true in Oklahoma as well. And we would expect that to be true in any state. So yeah, favorably disposed to energy does not mean getting away with murder in any respect.
Where are you at with the Texas one? The North Dakota one, you've been going on 10 years now? 12?
Yeah, it's been 10 years, and
Yeah.
we're hopefully looking at the final bit of engineering before we start buying and fabricating steel for Davis. We're probably well in the Texas refinery. It's funny, we talked about Teddy Roosevelt National Park. We had optioned a site for the Permian facility right outside of a town in Texas named Kermit after Teddy Roosevelt sold his son. So we were
Hmm.
following Teddy across the country, but that was a ranch location, and the patriarch of that ranch passed away, and the children uh, were not happy about having a refinery. So we are in negotiation on another site right now for that plant. Once that's done, then we'll start on the permitting. Um, in Cushing, uh, we have some design decisions to make because that that refinery will be using a combination of Permian crude brought in from Texas and Bakken crude brought down from the Bakken into that crude collection point there. So crude supply and our design basis for that refinery is quite a bit more complicated. And I don't want to fall in the trap of getting too far away from our David's concept of a very simple process that is easy to keep clean and end up with a much more complicated refinery that has more difficulty on the engineering side. So we're being more methodical and careful about that one.
The sustainable aviation fuel has come into play. You mentioned before some different, I believe it was vegetable or seed oils that would be mixed with the diesel in order to create a, I don't know if they call that sustainable diesel, ethanol diesel. I'm not really quite sure what the diesel word is on that.
Yeah.
Are you involved with that at all?
Yes. Well, at Davis, well, first of all, diesel and aviation fuel, jet fuel, both come from kerosene. Uh, you just finish them differently. We made the decision up in Davis that the market for diesel was so much more favorable up there that we would take all of that cut and turn that into diesel fuel. Uh, Down in Permian, uh, the people that are buying all of our product have made it known that there is a market down there for so-called SAF, or sustainable aviation fuel. So we will probably take at least half of our kerosene cut and turn it into aviation fuel, and that will also be in part renewable. We'll have the same engineering issue there that we will have hydrogen coming out of our process, and that can be used in combination with soy or corn oil to create that renewable component. So we're going to do that, yes.
When I think back 10 years ago, 12 years ago, when we started interviewing the different individuals involved, from, like I mentioned, yourself to subcontractors to engineers to different executive officers that oversee different departments. Really as a not only a method of education and awareness, but more or less transparency, because I knew from your point of view that transparency was one of the most important elements of this refinery, because there has not been one built since 1976. And for whatever reason, there hasn't been one built since 1976. So everybody's going to have a question. Not
Yeah,
only people that are for it, but against it, and just people like myself that maybe not have, don't have a dog in the hunt, but will be like, well, wait a minute, why has it been 50 years now? What's going on? I mean, so for you to have the foresight to see that, I think is commendable. From from my standpoint, like I was saying, I'm looking at us now and we're on video. When we first started this was over a phone. And
Yeah,
sometimes it would take me 2 to 3 days to get the interview online because I would have to wait a full day of upload time because the files were so big compared to my, I don't know if it was AOL back then, but you get my point that the
right.
the internet wasn't necessarily fiber optics, or maybe weren't even Cat 5 at the time. Now they're at least Cat 5. But um, when you look at what you've done, 10 years is like 100 in the terms of technology. So much has changed and so much is different. You mentioned before when we started the interview, and you've never done that before, where you referred to it as a digital refinery or in
Mhm.
some format. Talk to me a little bit about the technology changes, which has led you to now brand this refinery as a digital Davis refinery.
Yeah, this is fascinating, and it's one of the biggest innovations that we've been able to make use of in the Davis Refinery. And I look back to when I first began my career in the energy business, and I was working for a company that built refineries and power plants and chemical plants. And one of the interesting things was you would, for instance, there was a room in the design area with big long tables, and there'd be a spool at each end of the table and a continuous run of paper along it. And that's where all the piping drawings were done. And a spool was a certain length of paper, and you would actually refer to a large plant as one that was yeah, that's a big refinery or chemical plant that got 20,000 spool drawings for the piping for that plant. And the same was generally true of all the other elements. It was stacks and stacks of paper, and even the proposals for a large plant were enormous amounts of paper. I can remember Iran is in the news these days, and one of the refineries I worked on was the refinery in Esfahan, Iran, and the that was a 250,000 barrel per day plant. The proposal for that project was a container full of binders. The design drawings that went over as that project neared completion was several containers worth of drawings and duplicates sent to the home office of the National Iranian Oil Company. Uh, that's gone. Um, that's all digital. Uh, when you have the Davis Refinery fully designed, and all of we're out talking to fabricators now for all the modules in the plant. They will be submitting their proposals and their fabrication drawings in electronic form, and they will be merged into a master file that is essentially a it exists in the cloud, but the design for the project is completely digital. And the way that you take that design and interpret the operating uh, nature of the facility, how it will operate, and simulate operations on, let's say, you vary the API gravity of the crude oil somewhat, heavier versus lighter, or lighter sulfur versus heavier sulfur coming in. You can determine using that digital twin of the refinery what that's going to look like. And not only that, you can determine dangerous boundary layers of operation. You don't have to blow something up or start a fire in order for you to learn that you don't want to do that. And you can train your operators using that digital twin to where it's done safely, and it's just like them driving a car or driving a plane in a flight simulator. We've come that far. The paper is gone. And the better part of it for us, when you come to, excuse me, you come to the Permian refinery, it's like a document on Word. You call up the old one and you start tweaking. You don't have to start from scratch with everything. You know, you're going to have you're going to start out with 65% of your design done as we get going on the Permian and the Cushing projects. So that partnership with the firm that's doing our design and construction, McDermott International, is a very close one. And we've also partnered with a firm called Aviva to do the digital part of it. And, you know, it's amazing that the information revolution that has taken place over the last 40, 50 years, the energy business has been very stubborn in resisting that. Uh, there are very few people out there doing this way. And the reason is, in part, kind of the same reason that you haven't seen a brand new grassroots refinery for that many years. You know, when the Clean Air Act and the Clean Water Acts were passed in the 70s, if I were in charge of the refining group at Chevron or Shell, and I looked at that new set of requirements and I needed more capacity, I think I would have also decided to go tweak one of my existing refineries a little bit or add a little here, add a little there, and not go through that process of trying to do a brand new plant that incorporated all the latest and the best.
You
And
know, it's interesting. I'm going to jump in here for a second because
sure.
what you're reminding me of is an interview I did in 2013 with Carrie Frank from Comply 360. And I believe she was out of Wisconsin, I want to say originally. But anyway, she came into the oil and gas industry during the $100 oil from 2010 to 2014 when everybody was really promoting the industry in a very favorable way. And she was an outsider in the industry who came in from tech. And her achievement was remarkable in the aviation industry. And this is what she was trying to bring into tech. And this is what you're currently doing. So in the aviation industry, pilots had to carry around this 50-pound black box that was full of paper. And every time there was a new regulation or a new HR requirement or a new, fuel source or a new whatever, anything that changed, the whole thing had to be, reprinted and put back into the box, this 50-pound box. And so you had the human cost of changing all the different pieces of paper. You had the human cost of making sure that these 50-pound black boxes, if you will, of policies and procedures that you're required to bring on and have in the cockpit at all times that are up to date. So when she introduced iPads into the aviation industry that replaced that 50-pound box, not only did the aviation industry see an instant savings on the personnel because they could redirect the energies of that person into other areas or trim the fat if they needed to trim the fat, because this is now a mundane job that has been replaced by technology. So, that's the truth of the matter. This technology was supposed to replace a lot of the mundane and unsafe jobs and leave a lot of the other jobs for humans. The other thing they found was that 50-pound box over the course of a year had a significant amount of fuel savings to where it actually showed up as a percentage on their overall, P&L at the end of the year type of a thing. And that's what I always think of when I think of your refinery, is that the ripple effects that are happening that you're not even going to know about for a year. And you're still trying to demonstrate and show a lot of these, Department of environmental qualities and skeptical investors and political people that are just there to waste your time because they've already made up their mind before they came into the meeting type of a thing. That's the part that is never lost on me on how, this 5'1", 100-pound woman changed the aviation industry. And basically just by introducing iPads into an industry. But that's really how simple things can be, but yet how difficult it can be to get through the human element of things. So I just wanted to point that out, that this is something that has worked in other industries too, if you look at it in the right light. Are you having problems, educating some of the different local and state people on some of these, I don't know if you want to call it ancillary environmental impacts, or the butterfly impact or the butterfly effect that this would have? Because as you mentioned, once you're able to prove it in real time and not on a PowerPoint, the other refineries are going to now change their ways to do this too. And maybe not overnight, but small parts that they can. Go ahead. Yeah.
No, it's going to be a burden for other people in the industry to face building a new project and taking a look at what we've done and having to match that. I think that's good for the industry, that everybody's going to have to adopt a new set of best practices. And it's not just in the, I alluded more to the engineering and construction innovations that have been required, and that's important. But when you talk to Eddie from ZIA, one of the important functions that his firm has done for us is modeling the emissions from the refinery. You take all of the pipe runs and all the pieces of equipment, and he has a very sophisticated model that did not exist until he made it, showing how emissions come out of a project. And that's going to become part of our operating model for the refinery. In fact, we'll have optical sensors all around the Davis Refinery that'll record and observe all of the emissions from every piece of the plant and along the fence line around it. And that information is going to be available all the time. It's not a matter of getting somebody to go out there for a week and measure that as part of a compliance test. It's going to be collected continuously, and it's always going to be able to show that we're in compliance on these emissions levels. So you take that and apply that to the permit process for the next refinery. That's a much more powerful tool for us to show a permitting agency as far as how this project is going to work. And it's not just air emissions too. We can do the same thing with regard to water and cooling water and how that all works. The refinery is a closed loop system. There's no discharge. So, we don't have water pollution issues that historically were what turned many refinery sites into Superfund sites.
Closed loop, are you talking about like a glycol or something like that? That is basically, it's a recycled and reusable liquid source in order to keep things cool?
Well, primarily use water, but
Okay.
The fact is we're not using any kind of cooling towers, so there's no cooling tower drift or chemicals that are used in the cooling towers to control corrosion that would get out of the loop.
Just to give people an idea too, that how far the water cooling has gone in terms of innovation. I spoke with the contractor who did the water closed loop system for the Ellendale, North Dakota data center.
Yeah.
And data centers are getting beat up for the water usage that they are using. Well, now they're using the closed loop system. And now it's not an issue anymore. Water is now not an issue for the new data centers that are bringing that up. They still have their other issues, sure, but the water one is one that the data centers are solving. And it's important to point that out because that is what you're doing too. You're solving these problems before they exist, before they exist. It's interesting
Yeah.
too, is there's once the thing goes live and once, whether it's a car or a kite or a, science project, there's always things to learn after the fact. But a lot of
Mhm.
times you're anticipating because there's certain things you can never tell until it's rolled out into real time. And that's the other part of this, I think, that is interesting too, is that the anticipation that you guys have put into being able to adjust on the fly and be flexible in case, the numbers do reach the max that you projected or the minimums that you're projecting type of a thing. Because there is going to be a little bit of dynamic management, isn't there? Once the thing does kind of go live, that there are a few things that you will have to just prove out, whether it be the water or emissions. That's
Sure.
obviously what the state was looking for, I'm sure.
Well, it's part of the process. The air quality permit from DEQ is a permit to construct. Once the plant is up and it's operating, then we will go through a period where we have the state and their representatives at the refinery and observing operations over several week period to determine whether or not the operating permit is issued. And that's entirely determined by how we operate the plant within the limitations in the permit. So, we have that as a hard stop on every single thing that would be done in the plant. It's known that it's one of the few areas that's engraved in stone as far as our project is concerned. You will not violate those permit limitations. So, we will go through that process as soon as we're in operation in a couple of years. And I'm really eager to get to that point. I think we're going to end up proving that we built a refinery that's even cleaner than the one that we promised to. And that allows us to go forth into Texas and Oklahoma and do an even better job. So,
Yeah, after planning a trip, it's fun to actually take it, huh?
yeah,
You get sit around talking with your wife and friends and relatives about, hey, I can't wait to go on this trip. Can't wait to go on the trip. Well, eventually you got to go on the trip, right?
yeah, I know. Yeah, it's
Uh,
taken us a while to get there, but we're getting there.
well, that's how it is in today's day and age. I mean, even with the trip I'm taking this summer, I've ran into a few roadblocks just because of the new. Back in my day, back in the old days, we'd call it friction and gridlock. When people can't, when decision makers can't make a decision, they got to go check with 10 other decision makers that have nothing to do with what they're doing.
Right.
I call that, gridlock and that kind of stuff, but that's the way the world is today. Um, and as I mentioned before, I came from the print industry and the media industry, and so we've had our share of paradigm shifts. And once you've been through, doesn't matter what industry you're in, I mean, when I went through the print paradigm shift, I finally understood what my uncles were talking about at Thanksgiving and Easter when they'd complain about how the supermarket has replaced the farmer. They're all farmers, and they grew up at a time when they were kind of revered and almost, people would shake their hand because they were feeding the world.
Yep.
Well, then the grocery store came in and farmers were kind of dirty and poor and looked down upon because
Hmm.
you could just go to the grocery store and get your food. I mean, that is a level of disconnect that you started the interview off by saying that you were stupid, but I think the word naive is better because just because somebody doesn't understand where energy comes from and they believe it's a light switch doesn't mean that you or I are stupid for thinking that they're an intelligent person. We're just being naive
Hmm.
because that's a whole level of, it is stupidity, but that's almost a trigger word in today's day and age. But that is a level of professional intelligence that is remarkable, like absolutely remarkable, to be in a room full of 6 to 7 figured executives, and they honestly believe the energy comes from the light switch, and your food comes from um, the grocery store. But these are real conversations that you've had and I've had, and we've experienced being a part of that culture. Um, this is, it's a very long-winded way for me to say that whether you're in the media or in the agriculture or into energy, it's much more expensive than it was 20 years ago. It's much more expensive than it was 30 years ago. And a lot of it has to do with time, just the timing of things, and you're trying to reduce the time by not having things transport as far. You're trying to reduce the emissions by the less transportation means the cleaner environment, et cetera, et cetera. The world of investing has changed too. A lot
Mhm.
of people now, they're done with the side hustles. They just want to invest in things. I got the contractor buddy I was talking to you about the other day. He tried to start 3 startup companies under his one bigger umbrella. He ended up spending more time on the startups than he did his own primary company. Now he just invests in deals.
Mhm.
He owns, I think, 3 hotels now. That he's 15% owner, that sort of thing, or whatever. He's got these investment groups that he becomes a part of. Um, you mentioned Oklahoma, so that to me is okay. I wrote down he must be looking for investors and new connectors, and because the last time we spoke, you were just in North Dakota and Texas. So if you've got new projects going, number one, are you looking for investors? And number two, who would that investor be? Because it can be, I mean, for some people, $5,000 is a lot of money, but for other people, we're not even going to talk to you unless you got $1 million. So
Yeah.
pre-qualify that a little bit and explain kind of where you guys are going, because the Oklahoma thing threw me off a little bit.
Well, the way that the capital comes into this business is kind of interesting. We're not a big publicly owned entity like an Exxon or a Shell, so we have to do things very different. The parent company is capitalized by accredited investors periodically. We raise money as we need it because we want to avoid dilution at the parent company level. Um, the capital we bring into the parent company is what pays for everything that we've done so far, and we have another round of that coming up to finish up the engineering on Davis that'll allow us to finalize the contract price. Once that contract price is finalized, and we're probably 3, 4 months away from that, and we need feedback from the fabricators and so forth to do that. That's complicated by tariffs and all kinds of other things. But once you get that done, then that's kind of the last precondition on the actual project financing, which is money coming into a separate entity that would own the Davis Refinery. And it's the same structure that was developed to cover things like hotels and everything else that is a big infrastructure project. So Meridian will have the management control of that entity, if you will operate it. But institutional investors, big investors will come in, and a lot of bank debt will go into that entity. And that's pretty much a, I won't say it's a done deal because we have to put the finishing touches on it yet, but the bigger money that goes into that entity is a separate financing that big investment banks are doing for us. We just have to finish up this last precondition. So that gets done. Davis gets built. We operate it. In the meantime, we're finishing up the permitting and so forth for Texas and then Oklahoma. And we go through the same process as each one of those gets to the same stage. Texas will get there first. That'll go into construction in about a year and a half, 2 years, and be finished, let's say, a year and a half after Davis. Oklahoma will do the same thing, and we'll get that started about a year and a half after Davis. And that's all big institutional stuff. The the money going into Meridian right now, we typically do that under a private placement, and we do some every year as we need it. And as I mentioned, we're getting ready to do a new round of financing starting probably the end of April. And that'll be the money we use for finishing Davis and getting Oklahoma and Texas into permitting.
How does that work then for the financing? You mentioned it's coming at the end of April, and you're a private company, so obviously I imagine there's some NDAs that people have to sign, and they've got to show that they've got some resources that, they're not, what do we call that in the real estate? Looky loos. They're not
Yeah.
just coming in, they're not coming into the grocery store for free samples only. They can actually afford to buy the Johnsonville brats that they're sampling out at, whatever, that kind of thing. I would imagine
Mhm.
you've got all that preliminary stuff, but what does the timetable look like? Because at the end of the day, a lot of these different private things, they can go through some unexpected cycles that people aren't necessarily aware of or expecting. That's why they're unexpected. And I'm a Libra, so my mind always goes to, extremes, biblically good and biblically bad and that kind of thing. And Amazon is one of those biblically bad scenarios that really made me understand the way investing works when you're talking about, I think you mentioned earlier, 1.2 billion is the projection for the Davis Refinery. So, you're talking, that's annually. So you're talking about some big dollars. And so in order to win big, you got to spend big. And,
Yeah. Well, yeah,
but
I need to correct
yeah.
that. That 1.2 is going to be the capitalization
Oh,
into that separate entity to build Davis. Each of the refineries will be approximately the same capital cost,
okay.
but that's a one-time only charge. Davis, as a company, separate entity, will have revenues of about 1.8 billion per year. So,
Oh, so I undersold you. Sorry. Didn't mean to
yeah, a little bit.
undersize.
Yeah.
Yeah, by point six there on the billion side. What's that, 600 million? Oh, sorry. Didn't
Uh,
mean to undercut you
what's
there,
a
but
half billion amongst friends? Yeah.
exactly. And I'm not saying that this is your position that you guys are in by any means. I'm just illustrating the Amazon point here, which was, so when Amazon first started, it was a private company and it had private investors. And it was so far ahead of the curve that I bet it lost money for over a decade. Like
Yeah.
it was just, it was the joke of Wall Street, even though it wasn't public. I think that my memory, what I do remember though, is that the investors were so in debt that they had to keep investing because the payoff was so good that it
Yep.
was a time game. It was now time. That's all it was. And I really look at your refinery kind of along that wave a little bit to where it'd be no different if somebody had the cure for cancer. It's just it's too good, too true. It takes time for people to educate. It takes time for people to absorb. And I went through this with the Crude Life and some of the other projects I have to where it is a waiting game. And sometimes you just have to wait for people to catch up to you. How much of that is included in your story? The timeline and the technology and the acceptance of people trying to catch up to where you're trying to bring them. Again, you can dunk a horse into the water, but he won't drink unless he wants to.
Well,
I made
yeah,
that up.
time has been a really important issue to us. I mentioned that at the beginning of our discussion where, it took longer to get permits. We ended up in years of litigation and, the Biden era was not kind to us. It, slowed us down a little bit. And as a result, we have an obligation to our shareholders to take advantage, I mean, not take advantage of it, take that into account in terms of what we see as the job we have to do in terms of creating value. It doesn't make sense to go through all the effort that we did on Davis and not do other refineries because of everything we learned. And why not apply that same value proposition to other opportunities? Why not take that same approach to permitting and energy and apply it to other types of energy projects? You mentioned the data center issues. We're taking a look at the same sort of thing in proximity to our refinery sites. Energy and the ability to generate electric power as part of this whole thing could become part of our business proposition going forward. But what you realize as you get into that time trap, if you will, that the true value of the company is not cooking oil. And you mentioned Amazon. It's the intellectual property that you develop on how to do something using all of these new tools. Like Amazon's gift was the business methodology associated with using the internet for transactions and to do it more efficiently than jumping in the car and going trying to find something. And that same type of intellectual property is what has gone into creating the Meridian model of doing projects that we can apply to many other opportunities. Unfortunately, after Amazon got their business methodology patent, the law was changed, so we can't go patent anything that we've done, which we were disappointed to find out from a room full of attorneys once, but we can still husband that intellectual property as know-how and apply it to these other situations, which we're doing.
And I can relate to that. I've had to do that as well within my small media company. We took a very similar approach to where the larger media companies, too much overhead, too many different regulations and too many other things, to where we became, more of a boutique. And obviously the intellectual property is what people take a look at as, kind of what I would produce. But I always argue with people to where I'm more in the distribution business than I am in the intellectual property business, because the intellectual property business, somebody can steal the interview we're doing right now and pass it off as their own, and there's nothing I can do about it. That horse has been out of the barn for years. And so I'll never forget when we were doing the magazine From House to Home, and our clients were newspapers. We had a very short window of time to where we did very well. We had 52 newspapers as partners, and as clients, we called them partners. And basically, we produced a home magazine for the newspaper, which they could insert into their high-end neighborhoods.
Right.
And so the advertisers, they got verified distribution from the newspaper. We leveraged our printing, so we got the cheapest print. We were actually Bonta, the world's largest printer. We were their number one client for 2 years. And yeah, we had 1.8 million circulation, and we were just chunking them out, 52 newspapers that needed these home magazines. And, building, buying, decorating, landscape, and remodeling, that was not an area that the newspaper really got from revenue. So we brought a non-traditional revenue source to them, which they loved because they were getting beat up by the internet left and right. They were going through their paradigm shift, right? So one of the newspapers, they looked at us, I think it was Omaha World Herald, to be honest, because they had the whole state. And just to give you an idea of how big the Omaha World Herald was, they had more subscribers in Lincoln, Nebraska than the Lincoln, Nebraska newspaper had. Because they were a better Omaha, what is it? The Nebraska Cornhuskers. They did better coverage than the newspaper out of Lincoln. But anyway, I'm getting to the point where they looked at us and they said, "Yeah, we'll do this magazine because we're in the distribution business. We're not in the information business anymore. We're in the distribution business." And as a former newspaper carrier that went door to door and dropped off the newspaper, I understood exactly what they were talking about. And he said, he goes, the only people who are better at the distribution business than us is the U.S. Post Office.
Mm-hmm.
But if every single person subscribed to us like they do to the post office, we'd be just as good. And he's right. When you have someone going door to door, that's the best distribution you can come up with. And really, that's what Amazon became at the end of the day. Their whole business is based on distribution and logistics. So that's how I look at a lot of what you're doing too, is really leveraging the positives, and you're fighting a lot of the negatives, which really don't exist. And another newspaper brought up this point to me, and I'll let you comment on it, which is they were going through their paradigm shift and all this other stuff. And they were, and oil and gas people will understand this. When you walk in the room, you're already in the wrong. You can't do any right. And this newspaper publisher said, he goes, "Jason, we could have brought in the Mona Lisa, and they would have pointed at some speckle of dust that we didn't even know was there and had nothing to do with our project, but they would focus on it and not take their point of view off of that little speck of dust. So therefore, the whole Mona Lisa doesn't even matter to them." And I went,
Right.
"Yeah, I can understand that completely." So talk to me a little bit about that, because I think that tide is changing a little bit. We saw what happened with the print industry. We saw what happened with the magazine industry, the radio industry, the farming industry. And there is opportunities where you do have to strike while the iron is hot, because after that 2 to 3 year window, that's it, gone. So I think that relates a lot to what we're talking about here.
No, I think you're right. I mean, and let's face it, we can be very proud of everything we've done on the information side and the data side and the engineering side, but the fact remains that somebody somewhere needs a gallon of gasoline in their car. And you look at the industry right now, take North Dakota, you've got a little over 1 million barrels a day of crude oil coming out of the Bakken. Some of it goes to the Marathon plant at Mandan. I think they're about 80,000 barrels a day. The rest of it goes somewhere else to be refined, most of it to the Gulf or to the East Coast. And then somebody pulls up at a station in North Dakota to fill up their car. That gasoline came all the way back up here for that. And that just doesn't make any sense at all. Amazon wouldn't have done it that way. They handle things a lot differently, and the efficiency of that existing process is sinful. It's wasteful, costly, and it's risky because it's a very long supply chain that could be disrupted any number of different ways. So rather than put your refineries on the coast, make them enormous, make them expensive and complex. Sure, you can use whatever kind of crude oil is floating by in a tanker that given day, but it's expensive. And then you have to ship everything a lot further to get it to the customer. Put our refineries right next to the crude oil, make predominantly light products and ship them to local markets so that you're not paying a huge amount of money that's, buried in the price of that oil or that product for all of that logistics. And that really is the physical world that we've settled into, that we're going to solve that particular problem little bit at a time for the industry. And, there are several places in the U.S. that we can do that. Permian is one. There's probably room for several of our projects down there at the end of the day. Oklahoma, there's room for several. So yeah, there's a lot of work to be done. Now we have a good formula for doing it. We're definitely getting busy.
Looking at the clock here, and we're already into overtime. And so I'm looking at winding down here, and I did want to talk about some Route 66 things because this summer we're going to be driving the Route 66, documenting the trip along the way. And I like to at least explain the context where this came from because I've always been attracted to Route 66 my whole life, and I don't know why because I didn't really grow up around it. And there's a song and there's some other things, but as I wrote a book on 66, it's kind of a bathroom reader book where each chapter is a standalone, like motels are because of Route
Yep.
66. And when you really think about that, that's amazing because it changed the engineering behind hotels. It changed how cities did civil engineering. And so there's so many, we mentioned kerosene earlier. Kerosene, when it dominated the planet, people would go to their hardware store. So people would go to hardware store for gasoline before gas stations. Well, Route 66 changed that. And
Yep.
and then I'm a big small business lover and big freedom and independence person. And so the way that Route 66 allowed families and small businesses to go become the door-to-door salesmen allowed art. And that's the other thing. Artists are coming out of the woodwork because it allowed artists to really accentuate their gifts and their products as well, because their music is a product at the end of the day, their stand-up comedy. But there was so many places along Route 66 that enabled and empowered these types of things. So I looked at Route 66 almost as Americana, that our current culture, almost in the same way that 96 to 98% of what we use on a regular basis comes from the oil and gas industry in a roundabout way. I would say about 90% of our culture comes from Route 66 and what has really percolated from there. And that is all because of the internal combustion engine. And that's
Yeah.
really what we're going to be focusing our spine on at the end of the day is all this other pomp and circumstance and good feelings that are coming from this 100-year anniversary that Route 66 is bringing, from nostalgia to culture to engineering to Americana. But at the end of the day, let's not forget and celebrate and honor that did come from the internal combustion engine. None of that would have existed without it. So your comments on that, and do you have any Route 66 memories?
Many, many. I grew up in California. Well, I grew up in the part of the California that thought it was Texas, but still, we spent a lot of time up in the desert part of California along Route 66, and it's a big part of my memory. But I think you're right. The post-World War II development of our culture was around the mobility that was created by the car and economic opportunity. And as a energy guy, I would get on my soapbox and argue that that's a fossil fuel argument about the roots of our current culture in this nation. And a lot of what you saw as pushback against that over the last several years of anti-fossil rhetoric, it was an attack on culture of mobility and prosperity that people began to sense. And I think it's to a great extent, I think that's anti-American. Um, but yeah, the symbolic meaning of Route 66, being able to get from, mid-America to the coast in several days. All of the ads that grew up around that, like Chevrolet, see the USA in the Chevrolet, just a great part of our culture for the last 80 years.
Phillips
It's
66. I was taken. I guess I was surprised that that name came from essentially from Route 66 involvement because, and this is
Yeah.
the part that I think people forget is that number one, the name came from technology, meaning that they had to create an engine that could go 66 miles an hour. Number
Yeah.
two, it came from safety, meaning that not only did they have to create an engine to go 66 miles an hour, but it had to be safe. And then, of course, we had the regulations that came out of it so that they could understand. And really, that's what the name came from, Phillips 66. It came from looking at how Americans can use gasoline or the internal combustion engine in a safe, innovative way that can be regulated. That
Hmm.
I don't think that name has ever been explained in that way. And I do think that, going from each county and being able to tell some of these stories and let the locals tell some of these stories, I really think it is going to help people understand uh, the oil and gas industry specifically in a way that they've never understood it before because of the folding in of Route 66 and the Americana pop culture. Not in the same way, but in the same way Landman did for the industry. Landman has brought in
Yep.
a new conversation that's probably not the most favorable to a lot of the executives, comparing them to the cartel and this and that. But at the end of the day, it is fantasy, but it does at least create a conversation for the industry like they've never had before with Demi Moore, Billy Bob Thornton, Sam Elliott. I mean, we're talking A-listers from Hollywood. We haven't seen that since, Giant, back when James Dean was doing the positive movies, because for a while there, the oil and gas industry in Hollywood wasn't too favorable, but it's nice to see that it is coming back. So, did
Yeah.
want to ask you if you had any favorite stops on Route 66 or any place I should check out along my ride.
Well, when you get to the part of Route 66 that's been largely bypassed by Interstate 40 in San Bernardino County, uh, Route 66 follows the railroad, and it's really interesting how the little names of the towns are in alphabetical order because that's the way the train water stops were designated. Starting at Amboy and moving to the east, unfortunately, but Amboy, Baghdad, Cadiz, Danby, Essex, Fenner, Goffs, Homer, they're all equidistant because that's where the train had to stop to take on water and coal. And Route
That's interesting.
66 followed that same alignment. And it's real interesting. Unfortunately, a lot of those little communities have been abandoned or a little bit bedraggled, but there was a time when they were, fantastic little pit stops for a traveler.
See,
Uh,
and to me, this is interesting because up in my neck of the nape here in the Minnesota, North Dakota, you'll see a lot of towns, small towns named after female names,
yeah.
and it's daughters of settlers or
Hmm.
wives and daughters, if you will. And I might be a little bit off on the mileage here, but they're generally, I think, I want to say 16 miles apart. And the reason for that was that the horse and buggy could go 8 miles, or was it? No, it was 16 miles and turn around and go 16 miles home in one day. They wanted
Hmm.
people to be able to bring the grain to the grain elevator. These towns had grain elevators. And so instead of water stops, there were grain elevators. But it had to do with that. And there's no, our culture is basically no different than it is today, because when the internal combustion engine came, you're talking about every hour and a half, something like that.
Hmm.
And now with the EV charging stations, it's every 30 to 45 miles that the federal government is forcing these interstates to put in charging stations because they're not reliable enough to go a half hour, 45 minutes without having a charging station. Just talked to a gentleman the other day. I met him outside of Fergus Falls because he had to go charge up. He was driving an EV from Chicago, and it was 40% less than he anticipated because it was colder.
Yeah.
And that's, we joked about, good thing there wasn't a 10% increase in the elevation, or it would have been 60%, because any little bit of elevation in those EVs. And again, that's the challenges that we're up against. And We're starting to see that, Europe's pulling back now. Porsche's pulling back. So many companies are pulling back from their EV all in to, well, maybe 2050 is a better target date instead of 2026, 2020, 2030, and that kind of thing. Reality's starting to set in a little bit. But anyway, just kind of in conclusion here a little bit, I'll let you kind of wrap up and summarize however you want. But Davis Refinery update, and looks like we've got some other ones in Texas and Oklahoma that are going to happen. You're looking for some investors, or you have another round coming up. I'll let you describe that a little bit more, and then kind of what's the takeaway that you want people to take away from this?
Well, I recognize that we've been at this for a while, but as a new company in this business, it's dominated by huge entities. We've had to be very careful and methodical. And as we talked a bit earlier, we were a bit naive in our approach to the permitting, but we overcame that. I think we're still naive, but maybe not quite as stupid. And as we go through the next several stages of our growth, people see Davis taking shape on the ground here very quickly. Texas and Oklahoma will follow. The capitalization will continue as we always have on an as-needed basis. We're still selecting an underwriter for this next offering, but should be out on the market towards the end of April. And, the people that are interested are going to see us showing up now in all the places we've been talking about. And I know a lot of the people that have been with us for a while will say, well, it's about time.
And how do people find that information and that sort of thing?
Oh, it's funny how the internet has changed raising capital along with everything else. If people go to our website, Meridian Energy Group Inc.com, there'll be a link to whatever our current status is on the offering, and it should show up in a couple of weeks. And
so investment opportunity, somebody could click on that, right?
yeah, there'll be a window for that part of it.
Yeah, I just pulled up Meridian Energy Group Inc.com, and of course, Inc. is INC, like the professional business Inc., not the literary wordsmith Inc. of using quill and ink. That's right. I was trained as a wordsmith, so I have to, separate those things. And being a Libra, it makes it even worse. But Mr. William Prentice, thank you much for the time today, and we'll have to have you back here real soon, okay?
Thank you very much, Jason. Always a pleasure. Thank you.